Hello and welcome to this session of Boundless called Why I Write. I think there's a few people still joining in, but we may begin so that we have enough time to have a wonderful discussion. Before I go any further, I'd like to pay my respects to the traditional custodians of the land. I'm coming to you today from the land of the Darug people, and I'd like to extend my respect to elders past, present, and emerging. My name is Zohra Aly, and I'm honoured to be one of the emerging curators for this year's Boundless. I'm grateful to Writing New South Wales and particularly Julia Salas and Martin Reyes for their support, and Sisonke Nsimang for her generous knowledge sharing of what it means to be a curator. In this session, I'll be asking my guests to share their experience of writing as women of a certain age, women of colour, and with a migrant background. I want to delve into what these multiple layers of identity add to their writing and affect what they bring to the table. I also want to know about their why. This session is called, after all, Why I Write. So let me introduce these incredible writers to you. Roala Gonzalez was born and brought up in Mumbai and came to Australia as an international student in 1998. She has been teaching and mentoring prose and screenwriters in communities, schools, and television institutions like Western Sydney University, Macquarie University, and Australian Film, Television, and Radio School, or AFTRS. She currently works as a lecturer in creative writing at UNSW, and she serves on the board of Writing New South Wales. Roanna's debut collection of short stories, The Permanent Resident, won the New South Wales Premier's Literary Award Multicultural Prize in 2018, and it was longlisted for the Dobby Literary Award in 2018 too. Roanna is also a recipient of the Prime Minister's Australia Asia Endeavour Award. Welcome, Roanna. Melanie Chang was born in Adelaide and grew up in Hong Kong. She's a GP and a writer living in Melbourne. Melanie is the health columnist for the Saturday paper, and her non-fiction appears in The Guardian, The Age, SBS Online, and Mianjin, amongst others. Her short story collection, Australia Day, won the 2018 Victorian Premier's Literary Award for Fiction, and her debut novel, Room for a Stranger, was shortlisted for the New South Wales Premier's Multicultural Prize and longlisted for the Miles Franklin in 2020. Welcome, Mel.
Thank you.
Cath was born in Guyana, and she travelled the world and Australia with her family. She now lives in Melbourne, and she writes across print, prose, film, and TV. Cath's work has been screened on ABC, SBS, and Channel 7, and her repertoire includes children's TV, documentary, and drama. Cath's book, Metal Fish Falling Snow, was longlisted for the Stella Prize this year, and it was shortlisted for the New South Wales Premier's Young Adult and Multicultural Literary Awards. It went on to win both the Victorian and Queensland YA Literary Awards for 2021. Congratulations, Cath, and welcome. And I'd like to thank you all for being here this afternoon. I'd like to begin by asking how you came to writing. Roanna, you worked as a journalist in India, but then you came to Australia as an international student to study film and television production. So how did you find your way back into writing?
Thank you, Zohra. Before I respond to that question, I just want to say that I am coming to you and zooming in from Gadigal land. And I'd like to also pay my respects to the custodians of this land, to elders past and present, and to remember that they were the first storytellers of this place and continue to be. Thank you for having me, Zohra, on this panel with the very brilliant Melanie Chang and Catherine Moore. I just want to say first, when we say women of a certain age, the way I interpret it is as women who are in their never-ending prime. Okay, let's just make that clear right now.
Of course.
So in terms of how I came back to writing, I feel like I've always known that I was a writer, always. I'm one of those people who as a child used to write really bad poetry, but was encouraged and praised by my parents and my family and my teachers. And I think a lot of writers would have similar trajectories of starting out kind of playing around with words and getting that first kind of praise from a supportive family, a supportive school environment. And so that's how I began to think of myself as a writer without really knowing what that actually meant in real terms. So I've always been a writer, and I've always thought of myself as a writer. This is no comment on the quality of my work or anything, but just the habitus, the way I think of myself has always been as someone who takes pleasure in the process of writing. And so, yeah, that's how I think of myself and how I've always been writing. I came here as an international student, having worked in India and studied in India before coming here. But throughout my time here, when I first came here as an international student, doing other things and working all sorts of jobs at the coalface, I always knew I've always known that I would always be writing in some way or the other, whether as professionally or not. But I always have that. Maybe that's not the wisest career choices to make, to always think of yourself as a writer, because as they say, once a writer, always a waitress. But but I can't do anything else. I can't think of myself as anything other than a writer. So I will shut up now and say thank you.
Mel, you've quoted Chekhov a few times. He famously said, "Medicine is my lawful wife and literature is my mistress. When I get tired of one, I spend the night with the other." Can you tell us how you came to have this double relationship too?
Yeah, I mean, that's not so politically correct, is it, the quote now? But, I like the playfulness of it, I guess. And yeah, I guess similar to Roanna, I also fell in love with reading and writing from a very young age. I also love the quote from Saul Bellow, which is, "A writer is a reader moved to emulation." And I feel that that was my initial impetus during school, is that, I'd read these books, I'd be so immersed in them, and I just loved that sensation and feeling. And I think initially, at school, writing was kind of that like I was emulating. I didn't have a lot to say myself. I was just trying to recreate the joy that I experienced as a reader. And then, I grew up with a very practical Chinese father who often said, "Writing's a great hobby. It's a hobby. Maybe think about something that, will be more vocational." And lucky for me, I loved the science as well as the arts. And so I did end up going into medicine. And for a long time, I put writing aside, I must say. It was really only once I completed all my training, even my general practice training, before I kind of picked up pen and paper again. And really that was quite accidental in a way. I came across an organization called the Creative Doctors Network, which was a group of doctors who gathered. They had interests quite broad, photography, visual arts, film and writing, and they would meet every couple of months and just share their work. And so I decided to go along to one of those sessions. And one thing that I really noticed at those kind of conferences was that these doctors were happy, as opposed to some of the consultants and GPs that I'd come across in my work who were quite burnt out. And so I think that happened quite early in my career, which was fortunate. And I guess I realized that this was a way to have a career in medicine and not get burnt out. It was going to, so that's when I started to kind of, experiment a bit with pen and paper. And initially it wasn't for I didn't have any outcome, in mind. Publishing was not something I dared to even entertain as a possibility, because unlike Roanna, who always saw herself as a writer, for me, writers were up here on some kind of pedestal, and I never thought that I quite yeah, I wasn't a writer. I wasn't, you know, of that caliber. Even till now, you know, I very much have that, suffer from that imposter syndrome in terms of calling myself a writer. But I think it saved me in many ways. The writing and particularly general practice, I think, are quite complementary. You know, I feel that in general practice, I trade in stories. You know, patients don't tell me a list of symptoms, they tell me the story of their illness. And, you know, and the other common tool, obviously, to both is, you know, empathy and trying to see yourself in someone else's story. So trying to see the world through my patient's eyes is not that dissimilar from seeing the world through my character's eyes in writing as well. So yeah, I'm glad I can juggle both. Yeah.
Cath, you mentioned your book, Metalfish Falling Snow, began life as an idea for screen. How did it become prose? Can you tell us the journey?
Yeah. So yeah, like Roanna, I, you know, investigated and spent a lot of time seeking out and searching and placing myself as a writer, and really thought for a very long time that would be within the realm of screenwriting. I went to AFTRS and did a master's in screenwriting, and for a long time I thought, because that's on the piece of paper, you know, that's what I've got to be. I was kind of beholden to that particular pathway, and so that's where I started my writing career. It was in the screen industry. And so yes, the screenplay that I wrote, which became the book, had an interesting life. It won a couple of awards, and I managed to get a producer and director attached who'd made Looking for Alibrandi. So they worked in similar kind of YA territory, but the film never ended up eventuating, wasn't made. So as you do with a lot of projects, you put it in that bottom drawer. Sometimes you forget where the key is, and it just stays there for a very long time, and it's suddenly, that's right, what was in that drawer? And so I think I was a bit preoccupied by both the character and the sense of story itself. It had never felt completed in a way that I was happy with. There was something missing about it. And so I took it out and I thought, well, it would be interesting if there was a life beyond, the screenplay. And so I wrote, I wrote it as a novel. I wrote the manuscript having never written in that space before. And often there's a sense of liberation when you don't yet know what not to know. So I'm writing with, wild abandon, and, I'm kind of naive about process and outcome as well. So it was probably one of the most enjoyable experiences, I have to say. That's a nice space to be in. So I sat with that for a really long time. It took a very long time, because in between film school and where I am now, I also stepped into academia and did a PhD in Danish screenwriting practices, and then stepped into the world of print media. So finally had a manuscript and managed to get it published. Got a lot of no's before I got one yes. That's all you need, is one yes, but it took a while, as it often does. And so then I worked with my editor, Jane, at Text for another 4 or 5, 6 drafts. And what I found in that process was I found the ending that I had always wanted. And I did that by going back into my past and re-establishing a connection with my father, who is my connection to my Guyanese heritage. And so part of the trajectory of the character ended up being, a parallel story with myself and my own sense of harking back to my Afro-Caribbean heritage. So yes, if it was not for stepping into a different landscape, the world of literature, I wouldn't have found the story that I think was always there, but I hadn't yet tapped into.
Thank you. So you mentioned that the writing gave you a leeway into going into your past, Cath. What do you write about? What else do you write about? Or what sort of things are you hoping to connect with your readers in your writing?
Yeah, gosh, that's a really good question. And I think you know, our preoccupations change as we do, as we shift into different stages of our lives, and we have different, you know, ideas and questions that, you know, kind of drive our work. You know, and I think looking at, you know, what is your intersection is often a really interesting question to ask as a writer, because I think that also changes too. You know, when I was writing within a print media capacity, I'd often tap into my experience as being a mother, for example, or being, you know, trying to balance, you know, working and, you know, having a writing career, or, yeah, there's something about the temporality of different writing spaces as well that impact on what I write and who I'm writing to. So yeah, with print media, there's a sense of urgency that it's a contemporary kind of, you know, ideas and issues that you're responding to within a smaller time frame. But then if you sit, for example, you know, with literature, you have a different headspace, and perhaps your timeline of process is far broader or longer. So the ideas as well have a different form or shape or intensity to them, because you are sitting with them longer. And again, similarly with, you know, working in the screen industries, that particular sector, you are influenced by what is happening in the ether, what are the issues, and some of the, yeah, what are the preoccupations that are being interrogated in that space. So I think, you know, being a writer, you've always got your eyes in different landscapes. And I think both Mel and, you know, Roanna, we all, you know, work and write in different places, and we have different audiences. So I think I'm always trying to respond. I'm always trying to ask first rather than impose ideas. I think it's that balance between bringing something to the page, but then also having that curiosity that you have, you know, kind of, that's the instinct of the writer is to ask, well, am I asking the right questions? Is this another angle? Do I need to pivot? What is it that I am really trying to interrogate? Yeah, so it's a dynamic, I think, what I write. I bring something, but I'm also seeking and searching for something to complement my curiosity.
Yeah, great answer, Cath. Mel, you mentioned that your patients give you they don't tell you a list of symptoms, they give you their stories. So, you know, has that sort of fed into your writing? Is that what informs your work?
Oh, definitely. I think it's a great privilege to be, you know, privy to those very intimate stories. When people often present to their GP, it's at a time often of vulnerability. And so I feel like not only the privilege of hearing their stories, but having that insight into worlds that I wouldn't normally have insight into has definitely informed my writing. You know, the fiction, it's a less direct, you know, translation. I guess nowadays, when I've been working on the health column for the paper, I have started to, you know, move into the territory of nonfiction and actually using some of the real stories, which has been quite a difficult transition in many ways, or quite nerve-wracking for me in terms of maintaining patient confidentiality and respect, whilst also telling what I feel is an important story, to maybe generate empathy for a population that maybe don't have that privilege of those insights. So yeah, I don't think, I mean, in many ways, you know, I talk about my dad, but in many ways, I feel like I benefited from my career in medicine in that I am a better informed, worldly human being, and that actually helps me to write better stories, definitely. Yeah.
And Roanna, your writing usually hones into the details and quirks of the Indian migrant experience. Can you tell us a little bit more about that? Where, you know, what inspires your writing?
Yeah, thank you. I love what both Cath and Melanie said about you need to have you need to build up that skill of having empathy. I mean, it sounds terrible. I mean, we should not need to build up anything in relation to empathy, but I love that idea. I mean, I completely, that resonates so much with me, that idea of you need to have empathy for the characters you're working with or the subject you're working with. But also what Cath said about this being a kind of a fluid kind of exchange between what you're seeking out and seeking in the world in terms of the kinds of stories or pieces you're working on, and also asking questions and being open to the chance encounter, being open to surprise and delight around you that you can kind of feed back into that creative process as a writer. So for me, yeah, my collection of short stories was specifically about Indian women in Sydney. But that was deliberate because I just was also trying, one of the things I was trying to do was to write about different ways of being Indian and different ways of being Australian. Because right now, not just right now, but over many decades and centuries, the idea of what it means to be Indian has been narrowed to a very particular thing, you know, upper caste, Hindu, kind of Brahmin, etc., and upper class as well. So it's trying to kind of write about the different ways in which one can be an Indian in diaspora, but also different ways of being Australian. Like, you know, that idea of the way we imagine ourselves as what an Australian might be. And that has to do with the way Australia projects itself, that imaginary of what it means to be Australian through media, through tourism, advertising, etc. So it's trying to write a little bit to resist those very narrow conceptualizations of what it means to be of different cultures. But yeah, so I'm trying to kind of look at different ways of encountering the world while having certain questions in mind, but also being open to surprise and to the chance encounter as well.
Thanks, Roanna. So I think no matter where we've all grown up, we've been brought up on a reading diet of books by English writers like Enid Blyton. And I always imagined myself sitting in a treehouse with the Secret Seven, drinking ginger beer and lemonade. Not quite sure if I was allowed to have ginger beer, but anyway. And Cath, you mentioned to me that you used to ask your mum to pack you a duck box to take with you to boarding school at Mallory Towers. But we were really far removed from those lives living on our different continents. And, you know, Toni Morrison says, if there's a book you really want to read, but it hasn't been written, then you must write it. I'd like you to tell me, what is your why? What is the reason that you write? Who would like to go? Roanna, would you like to start?
Yeah, sure. I loved what Melanie said about writers, referring to the Saul Bellow quote, about writers being readers driven to emulate. And also what you just said, Zohra, about Toni Morrison and lots of other writers have said, you know, write the book that you want to read that hasn't been written yet. And that's certainly why I write, because we're all seeking versions of ourselves on the page. We're seeking validation, we're seeking mirroring, but also new ways of looking at the world. Not only mirroring, but new perspectives and new flashes of insight that we can get from others. And so I'm absolutely driven to emulate when I read really beautifully written works of fiction and nonfiction. And yeah, so why I write is firstly because I can't not write. And of course, this has nothing to do with the quality of the writing or anything. And like Melanie, I completely feel debilitated by imposter syndrome all the time. In fact, with this panel, I thought, oh my God, Zohra's going to realize I'm an imposter and she shouldn't have invited me on this panel with Melanie and Cath. Of course, I can rationalize that and say, no, you know, of course, that's not true, etc. But certainly we all feel that sense of being not worthy of this kind of position of being a writer. But at the same time, I can't not write. I have to be writing of course, life gets in the way. And, you know, there are things like children, etc., that one has to deal with, children and work.
So annoying, aren't they? Oh,
so annoying. They provide really interesting research materials. I strongly recommend children as research material if you can bear them. But no, not to trivialize. Of course, I do love my children. Please let that be on record. But yeah, the reason I write is because I can't not write, and also I want to read things that I can't find anywhere else.
Thank you. Cath?
Oh, look, I'm totally with Roanna there. That, yeah, it's something of an imposition. I think I have this constant desire. Sometimes it's conscious and sometimes it's not. And I think the older I get, the more I lean into my writerly self. I mean, talking about kids, I often am with my kids at home, and, you know, one of them will say, Mum, you're talking to yourself again. And I'm just constantly with my other families that I'm constructing in my head. You know, I really do. Often there is no kind of gap between my real life and my life as a writer. There's a constant kind of conversation going on between the both of them. But that informs the work too, I think. And I'm, yes, what am I writing to? What am I speaking about? And I think a lot of it has to do with I think this loneliness that I lived with for a really long time. And Zohra and I were talking about this yesterday, this idea that if you have grown up in a culture where there is a default and you don't necessarily correspond with that idea or that particular context, then it can be really lonely growing up, not having those visible reference points. And I think to add to that, I had another kind of loneliness that I lived with, in that I was raised by a single mother and I was an only child. So I was with myself for a lot of the time growing up. And I also had a lot of questions about the world that I felt was impenetrable. So as a child, I think I naturally spoke to myself and with myself about the world, because the world was quite fearful to me growing up. And also being a mixed heritage and having a white mother, Australia at that time in the 80s wasn't very kind all the time to family units that didn't follow a particular mode or model of being. And so a lot of the time I felt very visible in a way that was uncomfortable. There was a sense of animosity, I think, about being out in the world, being part of the world. And, you know, writing for a lot of people for lots of different reasons is a refuge. And I certainly thought it was a sanctuary, really, where I could just go deep and down, and there was a sense of safety in terms of just being with myself and figuring things out by virtue of bringing thought to the page. And that's still what I do. I have a lot of questions that I don't think we've necessarily had a platform through which to examine the questions and this sense of identity, and what Roanna was touching on. There's lots of different ways to be or to live in Australia. And I think everybody is now, starting to appreciate and recognise the fact that there's a lot of work to do in terms of bringing more voices into the room. And I speak a lot about being in the room, and that's really important as an idea, that we have a greater sense of diversity represented in conversations in lots of different platforms, not just in terms of a literary capacity, but that's what I am speaking to. That's what I'm responding to. I think I'm trying to challenge the fear that I grew up with, that I shouldn't rock the boat. I shouldn't, I should placate. I'm very good at placating and being quiet and deferring. Yeah. So writing is an uncomfortable space for me at the same time, because I'm not used to servicing my creative voice. I'm good at listening and ascribing to other people's ideas, but for my own, it's a new experience to give myself that validation too. So I'm remedying my own past, I think, when I'm writing, but I'm also seeking connection and communion with other writers and other people who may have felt the same or who are tackling the same issues of identity and disability.
Thanks, Cath. I'm sure a lot of writers identify with a lot of those feelings that you expressed. Mel, you said earlier on that writing saved you. Did you want to explain why or how?
Yeah, I mean, I love the idea for this panel of why I write, because I think it's not a question that's really posed to us a lot of the time. We get asked a lot about the craft or the process, but yeah, I think it's an important kind of thing to explore our motivations or intentions. And so in the lead up to this, I was thinking a lot about it. And I mean, if I'm truly honest, I think when I first fell in love with writing, it probably came from not particularly noble, motivations. I think really it was quite, in a way, a selfish thing for me. It was a pure passion, joy kind of thing that I derived from it. And I distinctly remember this one moment where I think the seed was sown for me in terms of wanting to really be a writer. And it was sometime in late high school where I was the type of person who didn't just do their English assignments, but did extra writing, creative stuff in my own time in the school holidays and things. So I had lots of old stories, and I had a particularly close friend who was also very nosy, and I would be out of my room and she'd be going through my desk drawers and things, and she discovered a story I'd written. It was half finished. And when I came back into the room, I was, shocked to see her halfway through this story, because as you know, it's a very personal thing, and a draft is not necessarily something you want to share with people. But she was so into the story, and she was, calling some of the characters bitch and all this stuff. But she was so like emotionally involved with this story I'd written. And that was really the first time, I'd had English teachers read stuff, but it's not the same. She was like a friend, and she was really invested. And I think that for me was just like amazing. I thought, I've written something and I've moved her in this way, and that was just like, I mean, talk about a dopamine kind of hit, that was great. And I always remember that as kind of, the first real experience of a writer-reader interaction. And so that kind of got me hooked. And then of course for a long time I didn't do much writing, but that always stays in my memory as kind of driving at least some of the motivation for me. But I think also the why question, the answer to that does change with time. So, maybe that was at one point my motivation. For me, the real breaking out for me was my short story collection, because, that got attention in a prize, and that's when publishers and agents were involved. But in the writing of that short story collection, because I was not part of the writing community, I'd go to the odd session just to, again, try and get some ideas about craft. But I wasn't aware of, the Own Voices movement and the push for representation. And looking back now, I kind of, think of it quite shamefully that as a child and adolescent, I consumed all the canon, and it didn't really kind of realize how white it was, what I was reading, even though I was living in Hong Kong and had a Chinese father. I mean, I look back and think, how was it I'm not more conscious of it, actually? But what happened is, when I wrote my stories, and my stories were always written as kind of standalone stories. I was submitting them at various places. I never conceptualized as a collection until much later. So it was kind of accidental in a way, but I without being conscious of it, I had populated my stories with people from very diverse backgrounds. And I didn't do that because I was politically motivated. I just did that because that was my life. That was the friends I had, the people I was, interacting with, the patients I was seeing when I worked in the western suburbs of Melbourne. And it only occurred to me when people started reading the manuscript that was something unusual or different or or that could have some political implications in a way. And so so it kind of came about in this more, you know, instinctual way, I guess, initially. And now, of course, it's much different when I write. So with the writing of the novel Room for a Stranger, it was, I guess, a more conscious, deliberate process in terms of, you know, choosing to write a story about an international student interacting with an older Australian. So yeah, it's morphed and changed with time for me. Yeah.
Thank you. Your book, your book of short stories, Australia Day, was actually one of the gifts that I got as for volunteering at the first Boundless in 2017. So I've got great connection with that book because of that.
Thank you.
Roanna, you wrote an article earlier this month for Writing New South Wales on how to be resilient in a pandemic, very topical. And you take us through the many stages of writing the daily to-do lists that we do to, you know, organize our busy lives. And you've all spoken about family lovingly and you know, and about how they take us away from what we want to do. Do you schedule time in your writing, in your to-do list to write around your life and your family? When do you do your best writing, Roanna?
Okay, so in that essay, for those of you who may not have read it, I actually reveal that I actually don't know how to follow a to-do list. So the essay is almost an anti-to-do list, as you might read. I mean, if you have the time to look at it, it's on the Writing New South Wales website. And so I'm someone who makes lists, but then I forget that I have to actually stick to them. So my brain doesn't work in that ordered, organized way. Fortunately or unfortunately, maybe that's I have to work on that part of my personality. It's personality development needed to follow a routine. But really, I do my best work when I feel like I'm financially secure. I've been working in very precarious jobs for a very, very long time. But now I have I feel very lucky to have a job where I have some financial security. And I feel like, you know how I was saying at the start that women of a certain age means women in their never-ending prime. That's how I feel at the moment, that I feel like I'm just getting started, because now I feel like, okay, now I understand myself a bit better, and I understand what I want to do. Of course, you know, it's always a process of that dance between knowing and not knowing, as Cath and Melanie and Zohra, you've said in different ways. So I feel that I need to, I write in, I'm more of a pantser, as they say, flying by the seat of your pants rather than a plotter, although I do feel that it's important to have a kind of structure in terms of the work that I'm doing. So if I have a sense of the ending, as Michelle de Kretzer and many others always say, have a sense of the ending, and that'll help you get through this work faster. But also a structure in terms of stealing time from life in order to commit to the craft and to the process, to the practice of writing. So I try and write every day, but doesn't always happen, let's just say that. But I do feel that it's really important to treat writing as a practice, like you would yoga practice, Pilates practice, but something like playing an instrument. You have to do it often enough in order to get good at it. So that's, yeah. I don't know if that answers your question, but
yes, it does. I mean, I think the writing practice is something that I've heard a lot about, and it's good to know that you don't always do it every day. So reassuring to hear that. Cath, how about you? How do you fit the writing with the work, the paid work?
Yeah, gosh, it's so incredibly hard because it's, writing is such a tenuous occupation, and I know very few people who are able to just write, to make enough money from that practice. So I think, what that gives us is this skill of being flexible, and you do have to take opportunities where and when you can. But I also think with Roanna, I feel like I've I'm just in a place where, you know, I'm in my mid-40s and I just feel like I'm getting started. And I think we changed that idea of our personal timeline. I think there's an urgency when you're younger that if you haven't done anything by the time you're 30, then, you know, you basically got one foot in the grave, you know. And of course, as we know, that's certainly not true. So there is a benefit to being of this age and hopefully having some sense of financial stability, you know, like Roanna was talking about. And, you know, I am lucky enough to have that now. But I'm also, you know, I think I was a nomad for a really long time. I lived in lots of different cities and countries, and I'm now kind of rooted and grounded. And that's been tremendously helpful because it's just one less kind of thing to look at. You know, where am I going next year? What am I doing? I can actually just spend some time thinking about, you know, what am I doing? What are my intentions? You know, while I'm here, living here, and I'm lucky enough to, with Mel, we live in Nam and I live on beautiful Wurundjeri land. I think one of somebody else here I saw said that they were living on Wurundjeri land, and it's beautiful out here. And so I really commune with the land that I live on. And for me, that's been a really important part of my writing practice, is just every day, no matter what I write, and maybe I won't even get to the page, but every day I just try to sit in my garden and I just listen. And I just try to be still as I can. And I just really I'm really grounded and grateful for the natural world, more so now than ever. And I just pay my respects to the land that I'm on, because I know that it's doing something to the words in my head. It's doing something. It's giving it breath. It's giving it space, you know, that really impacts my work in really implicit ways, and sometimes really, you know, very, very clear ways to me. So that's a really important part of my practice, is not writing at all, actually. It's just being in the world and being conscious about my position in the natural world, and having humility about that. It's really important to me. And I hope to bring some of that humility and that openness and that curiosity, that kind of seeking and searching, to the page as well. And while I'm doing that, I'm writing. While I'm, you know, watching, you know, the birds, the magpie kind of tribes that I have dive bombing one another, or listening, you know, to the other, you know, the sounds of nature, I'm working things out. So it's kind of an editorial space, my back garden too. But because I write in different spaces, again, you know, academically and, you know, in the screen world and also literature, I like to be able to hop between spaces. So if I'm losing energy or a sense of connection to one particular project, then I will put it down and sit with another. And that's often, you know, I really love being able to flit between projects too, but just making the most of time. You know, some projects you can just sit there for half an hour and get something out, and others you really actually just need 3 hours. And if you don't have that 3 hours, then I just wait until I have the time, because I know that if I go to the page for that project, it won't be of substance. So it's understanding the framework of your projects, what you're working on, and what it demands in terms of your practice, as well as finding that time.
Mel, how about you? How do you squeeze in the time in your busy day?
Yeah, I think for a long time, I might have put off the writing because perhaps I thought, you know, you're waiting for the perfect conditions in which to write. I do have some writer friends whose children are grown, and they go to writing retreats in Tasmania for weeks on end and have no internet. And you know, that just sounds so luxurious and beautiful. But look, that's never been my writing experience, just because of where I am in life. You know, my short story collection took 10 years to write, but I didn't know I was writing collection at the time, so there wasn't that pressure of time. And short stories were good for my life with young children, and, you know, working full-time, in that I could work on them in short you know, snatches of time. So when my kids were napping, or in the evenings after they'd gone to bed, or and similar to what Cath said, you know, I used to have to drive out to West for like half an hour, and you know, whilst I was driving, it was a pretty boring drive. I'd be, you know, turning things over in my head. Like a lot of the writing is not necessarily when you're sitting at your laptop or physically writing. A lot of it is happening in your head. And I do remember sitting with young children, you know, with they're playing with blocks, and you know, my mind is working on the story, even though physically I'm also playing with my young child. Maybe some people say I'm not fully present, but you know, playing with blocks only requires so much presence, I would argue. You know, like it can be done. And I think I want to, if there are aspiring writers here in the audience today, I want them to know that you don't have to wait for the perfect conditions. You can write a whole book in little short 1 to 2 hour bursts. It's possible, and many of the Australian writers I know have done that. And yeah, it is just a matter of prioritizing that. I mean, I do love Stephen King's book on writing, because I read that very early on, and he said, think about all the crap TV that you watch, and just, you know, take that out of your life and use that, devote that time to writing instead, and you can actually produce something. And also just on the age thing, you know, I used to also, when I was an aspiring writer, read the bios of up and coming writers very intensely and look at their age and get very angry when they were the young superstar rising. But there were plenty of authors who were having their first books out in their 50s and 60s. It's not a sport. It's not like you have a prime where, you know, I mean, if anything, you probably are a better writer later on in life after having experienced life in all its forms. And, you know, so I think that's also just to give people out there hope, you know, that you can write in any circumstances if you're motivated to do it. And also there's never a too late a time to get into it.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm sorry to jump in. I completely agree with what Melanie is saying. And I think that I'm not the first person to say this. There's a lot of thinking and writing that has been done about the kinds of writing that we do and why some writers peak late, so to speak. I don't like the word peak and late and etc. And I was joking about I think we're all in our never-ending primes. Okay, there's no end to the prime. But I think if you're writing more conceptually, where it's about the concept, it's that flash of kind of brilliance, that I think, you know, like a lot of visual artists and musicians, okay, no disrespect to the visual artists and musicians, but that's a kind of conceptual work that is, you know, to me, that's what youth is really kind of primed for. But the more experimental, reflective work that takes time, it takes time to work out what are you here to say on the page. That takes time to develop that kind of really deep insight about yourself, first of all. Like, you have to have lived to think about yourself in that solid way. Like as Cath was saying earlier, I completely agree. It's only now that I'm kind of getting a sense of who exactly I am and what I want to say. I feel like I'm only just beginning. And I think because I'm more of in that experimental kind of sedimentary rock mode rather than igneous rock, conceptual, you know, really brilliant flash of idea that you can get away with when you're 18 or 19. But yeah, sorry to interrupt, but I wanted to say that. Yeah.
No, thank you. Thanks all of you. Some really practical and encouraging advice for all of us ever young women. And there's been lots of lovely comments from the audience, and there is a growing list of questions. So I think I'll do my last question and then we'll move on to the questions from the audience. So I just wanted to quickly throw to each of you. You all write in different forms. What's your favorite form? Is it fiction or non-fiction, or, you know, script, prose? Which one do you feel which one do you gravitate towards? Mel, would you like to take that one first?
Yeah, I guess for me, it's mainly either non-fiction or fiction. And I mean, I find non-fiction easier to write in some ways. It comes to me much more quickly. I can whip up an essay relatively quickly, and perhaps that's because there's less kind of options on the table, as it were. You know, I have to deal with the facts of the story and do the research. So in that sense, you know, that's enjoyable because it's fast and you know, it requires the research. But my true love, I would have to say, is fiction. Even though I find it, you know, it's that Hemingway bleeding onto the page type thing. It is painful. And I think part of it is because the options are endless, in that it's almost like standing in a supermarket, too many, you're almost paralyzed. What am I going to go with? Yeah. But there is also a freedom in that. And I guess I feel there's maybe more craft to some degree with that, because that you really do have infinite options of how things can progress. And so I would say that my true love, the kind of, you know, you write something, it's very rare that it happens, but you feel that, oh, that's good, and you've really captured something. That is something I get most from writing fiction. Yeah.
Roanna, how about you?
Yeah, I agree with what Melanie was saying, and also for me, it's about working out what I want to say, and then the form of it will emerge from that. So for me, it's always about what am I curious about? What is it that I want to say? Oh, I can say this best in fiction, or I can say this best in nonfiction, or in a script, or whatever it is, you know. But the form and the question kind of work hand in hand. Maybe the question comes first, and that dictates, that's the prior question. What do I want to say, and how best can I say it? Yeah, but sometimes, like, you're commissioned to write a piece of nonfiction or a piece of fiction, and then of course you just try and fulfill that commission. But if I was writing for myself, it would be, what do I want to say, and then what is the form or the genre in which to say it best?
Great tip, thanks. Cath, we were talking here about prose versus script. It was very interesting.
Yeah, I feel it's a little bit like, which one of your kids do you love the most? It's I love you all equally, but different. And I really do. I think that way about the different spaces that I write. I really love working in script writing form, because I love to collaborate, and that's a very collaborative venture. But at the same time, then you are beholden to other people's ideas. Yeah. You know, there's a lot of agendas that go with that, and it takes a really long time for things to eventuate. So I also then love writing, you know, in prose form fiction, because it's the complete opposite. It's far more expansive, whereas writing for the screen is very economical. You have to find a fine balance between detail and brevity, whereas it's I almost kind of luxuriate in you know, the written word when I'm writing prose. And like Mel is saying, there's something so gratifying when you finally find something that just sits where it's supposed to sit, and it sounds and feels wonderful. I don't think I have ever had that when I'm writing for the screen. It's and it's much more, what I love about it also is that it's that connection point. There's an intimacy between writing fiction, writing prose, that you have with your reader. You don't have that when you're writing for the screen, because you're writing something which is going to be it has lots of fingerprints on it, the screenplay. Lots of other people will bring their craft to the realization of that, you know, the script. And so the artifact, the film or the TV show, is starts with your words, but it's something else. It's its own form. Whereas when you write a book, that's what you deliver to your reader. And I've really loved having that exchange between, you know, my story world, and you know, being able to speak directly to the reader.
Thank you. Thanks so much. There's a list of questions. We've got a few minutes left. So I think I'll just pick a few that I feel we haven't answered already. So Fernanda asks, as an Australian migrant woman, I identify so much with your stories. How do you overcome the fear of stepping into invisibility through writing? Well, I think she means, stepping into visibility, becoming visible as a writer. Yeah, go for it, Roanna.
No, I'm just saying, ooh. That's such a fabulous question, Fernanda. It is a real fear. I completely hear you. It is a real fear because before you have work published, you're kind of almost anonymous and, you have nothing to worry about in terms of being vulnerable. But the minute you have work out there that's available to even one more person to read, you are putting yourself out there on the page. To me, it's about giving up the need to be liked. It's about giving up the need to be perfect, to be liked, to be loved, to be whatever. Yeah, we all want to be liked. We all want unadulterated praise, of course. But on the page, I think you have to be, you have to give up that need to be liked and be honest and scrupulous in terms of the story you're trying to tell, and tell that story as rigorously as you can. And so for me, maybe others have a different way of approaching this, but for me, that's about giving up my need to present myself as this perfect oldest child, Indian Catholic background, blah, 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 which let me just say, I've long given that up, but it just, the past kind of comes back. But yeah, for me, it's a real fear, but it helps me to kind of think about, okay, it's about the story, not so much about me. Don't know if that helps.
That's sorry, I'm just going to jump in and say, I absolutely agree, and that's something that I still really struggle with. Yeah. And it's having, I think, grown up, positioning myself as one to please. Yes. And you're right, you have to liberate yourself from that, and I think the work benefits from it. But that idea of the fear of exposure is also really real. And yeah, I continue to struggle with that, but also I recognize that no one writer can ever be a flag bearer for every issue, everything that they're exploring in their work. And so I think you have to be kind to yourself. Really, you have to sit with those struggles and that fear, and you have to ride through it, knowing that there is solidarity and that we are with you. I really feel this really strongly, because it's been, the community, the literary community has been so supportive of me. I'm a newbie and I don't really know anything, but I've just been surrounded by people who've been...
Cath, you've frozen a little bit.
There for a really long time, and shepherds of togetherness, where there's different ideas. We don't have to, for us all, am I still here? Am I back?
Yes, you're back. Again? You're back. Just
sorry.
Yeah. No,
maybe okay. I'll just be quiet. I've said my piece. Sorry.
I'm back. Comment here too.
I don't know what I said to say.
Sorry, Cath.
That's okay. Thanks. Mel.
I agree with what the others have said. I think it's something I really struggled with, having an author persona, and that there were expectations on you to have this brand or persona, which, is something that's so far removed when you're actually involved in writing the work. That doesn't even, if you're not also from that community, the literary community, you completely takes you by surprise. I remember, when I was doing interviews for the Australia Day short story collection, a journalist asked me what my vision for Australia was, and I just thought, what? Am I suddenly a politician? Like, what is this? It really was quite disorienting and shocking. I just wrote a book of stories that I felt these were important stories to tell, but people will automatically kind of elevate you to certain as a spokesperson for an entire community. And I think at the time I didn't necessarily know that I had the right to say I don't feel comfortable taking on that mantle, or it's not appropriate for me to speak for an entire community. And the only kind of thing that gives me hope now is that I'm seeing so many more writers from my own community and other communities coming into the literary world, and that means that that burden will be shared, and ultimately it will become so normalized that we won't be called on to be the spokesperson for this community. And it's still got a long way to go, but it's changing, and there are definitely, there's hope there that we won't have to bear that burden anymore.
And time for one last question. I'm just conscious that we've just gone over time, but just to go out on, I'm really sorry to the audience members who've sent in so many wonderful questions, but we've got just time for your top writing tip, Rashida says, that has served you well in writing books. So, Cath?
Oh no, I was hoping you wouldn't call on me first.
Well, if I put you on the spot,
Right.
sorry, we can go around.
Oh yes, okay, no, I do have it. As I said to you yesterday, Zohra, when you think you've finished, you've got your last draft, do another 2 drafts, because there's always something there that you might have missed, and it's always better to be sure of your work before you put it out there. I have put work out there that wasn't ready, and I really regret that I didn't give it the time that it deserved before I presented it to the world. So give yourself and your work the time that it deserves before you allow other eyes upon it.
Roanna?
I would say you must read a lot, and also, and this is advice that Michelle de Kretza and many other writers offered to emerging writers, and that is, have a sense of an ending. So something that you can write towards in order to kind of, give your work some direction, knowing, of course, that the ending might completely change by the time you get there. But that works for me, and it works for other writers to help you get to finishing as soon as you can.
Thanks.
And I would say, again, it's something else I've learned from that Stephen King book on writing: write with the door closed and rewrite with the door open. So meaning, when the project is in its early stages, don't talk to other people about it, because, as little as a raised eyebrow can derail the whole thing, and you haven't really worked out for yourself what it is. But once you have a sense of what it is you're creating, then you need that fresh pair of eyes, you need that perspective. That can be really between the key difference between an average work and a stellar work. I think that input, and it can be scary when you're an aspiring writer, but find someone in the literary community to give you that constructive criticism.
Thank you so much, Roanna, Cath, and Melanie. You've been really, really wonderful guests today for me, for my first time ever, and I've really enjoyed this conversation. I hope our guests have, as the audience have as well. You've just been really generous and humble with your, your work and your careers. Thank you so much, and thanks everyone for joining in today.
And thank you, Zohra.
You've
been an amazing compare. It's such a difficult role to have, and you did it with such grace and such openness. So thank you.
Thank you. It's been a wonderful experience. I'm really grateful for you to have accepted and for being here today. Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.